Hey everyone, this is Thoughts Between Shots, a storytelling podcast where one great question leads to one unforgettable story. I'm your host, Nammy Sirur, and every episode I ask my guests to tell us a story, and then we break down why it worked. So if you want to learn to tell better stories, ask more thoughtful questions, or just become a more effective communicator, you're in the right place. This is one of those in between episodes again where I don't have a guest and it's just you and I nerding out on the craft of storytelling and also asking great questions because that's another super important aspect of good communication. This week's question is something I heard again from Priya Parker's set of magical questions, which I'm obsessed with. It was, if you had to give a 20-minute presentation right now with no notes, no preparation, what would you talk about? For me, that's a really easy answer. But first, let me tell you a story. Imagine this. You're at the beach on a beautiful sunny afternoon. The sun is shining, the breeze is blowing, you're listening to the soothing sounds of waves, and you have just entered a sandcastle building competition. The whistle blows, the timer starts, and you get to building. You've done this before, you're feeling confident, you have an intricate design in mind. Then, about three-fourths of the way through, disaster strikes. A kid running by falls, trips over your sandcastle, and demolishes it. Not only that, he falls and breaks all your tools. So now you're sitting there staring at a pile of rubble. Your sandcastle is absolutely flattened, and all of your tools are broken and useless. Panic sets in because you're three-fourths of the way through, right? You're looking at the timer, it's still going. Everyone around you is now putting the finishing touches on their beautiful, intricate designs. And meanwhile, you're staring at sand, no castle. What do you do? How do you rebuild? Can you even compete? Will you actually be able to catch up? This is what it's like to be an immigrant in a new country. See, you're starting from scratch in virtually every area of your life. Your proverbial sandcastle has been destroyed, and all those tools you relied on back in your home country, your identity, your skills, your education, so many of those are useless now in this new environment. Meanwhile, your peers are just racing ahead, leaving you wondering, will I ever catch up? I know this feeling very well because when I moved to the States about 30 years ago from India, I experienced my sandcastle, my proverbial sandcastle, just evaporating in an instant. Because back in India in school, I was this popular kid. I was the star athlete, the teacher's pet. I did well in school and in studies. I had lots of friends. I was the house prefect. And then I moved to suburban Cleveland, Ohio. And in an instant, I was none of those things. I mean, I spoke perfectly good English, but my classmates could not understand my Indian accent or my British Indian turns of phrase. And I couldn't really understand the slang or their accent either. It took me a while to acclimate. And same with school. I was a good student in India, and then suddenly I couldn't understand the American school system. I mean, things like critical thinking or, I don't know, research papers were all completely new to me, and books like To Kill a Mockingbird or I don't know, of Mice and Men, all of these books, I just didn't understand the cultural references, the historical relevance. It was like it was in a completely different language. And then socially, of course, I was a total outcast. To my classmates, I might as well have beamed down from another planet. That's how foreign I was to them. Because let's not forget, this was the 90s and we didn't have the internet. We barely had American programming back in India. So all I really knew about the States was Jurassic Park and Archie comics. And maybe a few other things here and there, which like played in the 70s in the States, were things that were playing in the 80s and 90s in India. I felt so completely out of my element. Needless to say, making friends was pretty difficult. And like so many people do, I just clung to what was familiar, which meant I clung to my family and to my community. And rather than adapting and assimilating, I went the other extreme and became super Indian. And you can imagine that that only made it harder to fit in. Then something interesting happened. It was now decades later. I was now in grad school doing my MBA at the University of Houston. And I now had a bunch of classmates who were international students, many of whom were experiencing America for the first time. And just like I had done all those years ago, where I clung to familiarity and I banded together with my own kind, they were doing the same, which is completely understandable because they were trying to make sense of their new environment. And meanwhile, I was part of that status quo that was forging right ahead. So while my international student classmates were just trying to get over that initial hump, the rest of us were all racing ahead, doing all those crucial things you do in those first few months of grad school that set you up for success later on. We were forming crucial connections with our professors and peers. We were joining clubs and building our resume. All those resources that my international student classmates either didn't have the access to or the knowledge of. So they were at a clear disadvantage. Sandcastle destroyed, tools broken. And here's the interesting thing about the immigrant experience. A lot of those negative effects from those early years still linger long after you've achieved all those traditional markers of success. Because whether it was me or now my classmates, even when we went on to have big shiny jobs or all those things that told us we had made it, those lingering effects like self doubt, imposter syndrome, lack of confidence, all of those still stuck around. For me personally, it took almost 2 decades to fully rebuild and feel comfortable in my own skin, to be able to speak confidently with an accent and not feel self conscious of it, or to walk into any room and take up space, to feel like I knew how to own that space. 2 decades. That is a very long time. I don't know that we all have that kind of time, right? When I think back on it, what would have really helped in those early years and what would have helped to shrink that timeline, those 2 decades, was if somebody took me by the hand and said, "Here, Nami, here's a map. Here's how you rebuild." If I just had a guide to teach me all those things, big and small, about the immigrant experience, about being in a new country. I mean, there were little things like, okay, the difference between dishwasher detergent and dishwashing soap so that you don't get the two confused and accidentally flood your kitchen, or someone to help me understand social norms so I didn't accidentally say or do the wrong things all the time and keep getting into trouble without even knowing why. Because there's a lot of that. As immigrants, you constantly feel like you're saying or doing the wrong thing, or you feel like, I don't know why I can't just be myself. I was this one person in my home country. Maybe I was smart or funny or I don't know, outgoing. And then suddenly you come to this new country and you feel like, why can't I be as funny or engaging or outgoing? All of those things that I was back home. Essentially, what I needed was a fairy godmother. When I was little, I was given a hand me down copy of Cinderella, and it was a picture book of the exact Disney animation. So, with all the same pictures from the Disney movie. And I loved that book. And I think what I loved most about it was the fairy godmother, because she gave Cinderella a second chance. And yeah, sure, there was magic, there was the pumpkin and all of those things, but there was also the fact that she transformed her not into a completely different person. I mean, it was still her, it was still her personality, but she just gave her the tools to be able to present herself in a better way, in a more effective, more powerful way. And now thinking back on it, I was like, if I just had a fairy godmother, somebody to help me highlight my best aspects, not to become somebody I wasn't, but to just become a more confident version of myself. So that's why when I started my communications consulting company, I wanted to work specifically with immigrant professionals because I wanted to help them with exactly those things that I lacked in those early years. And I know that this is probably not the most popular topic right now. Immigrant is kind of a bad word these days in the current climate we're in. But I just want to say, so many of us know people who've moved from another country that wasn't their home country and are here now in this new environment and maybe struggling with either language proficiency or just understanding the culture and how to communicate effectively. Here's the thing, we all have the ability, yes, even you, to be somebody's fairy godmother. And it doesn't take a lot. All it takes is a little patience when someone's struggling to find the right word, or an open mind when someone has an accent that's different from ours, or even the willingness to explain something that may seem completely mundane and obvious to you, but isn't to someone who hasn't grown up in this country. These small acts of kindness can make such a difference. And without even knowing it, you're probably helping somebody rebuild their sandcastle. So, whether you're the one rebuilding or you're just offering an extra bucket of sand to someone, just remember, together we can build extraordinary things. So, whom was this story relevant to? And I get that that wasn't a full fledged story, but that's my point, that when you're asked to make a presentation at work or wherever it is, I used to run this video marketing agency called Misfit Communications. And my partner on it, Pavi, would always say this one line. She'd say, "Stories are data with emotion," which was so true because we'd work with these high level people who were partners at consulting firms or owners of big architecture companies and stuff like that. And often we would emphasize the importance of storytelling because, even if you're trying to do a sales pitch, even if you're trying to sell a SaaS product or whatever, there's always an opportunity to tell a story. If you just throw a bunch of facts and figures at people, they are not going to remember. That's not memorable, right? What's really going to stick in people's heads is when you make them feel something. So that was my point with the story I told, which wasn't really a story, but I talk a lot about my immigrant experience in this way. It's a collection of different anecdotes, but it's also an analogy because I'm trying to make it real for the audience as well, right? I'm trying to make it relatable. So it's not just, oh, woe is me, this thing happened to me, sad. It's, hey, these are a bunch of connected parts of my immigrant experience. Of course, there's lots of other aspects I haven't talked about in this particular story that I've talked about elsewhere. But here, I'm trying to make an appeal to the audience. I want you to understand what immigrants go through, what those early experiences are like when you first move to a country, what our state of mind is like, what are the things that are going on in our heads. And the best way to do that is through analogies. So I use the analogy of the sandcastle to showcase how, when it's destroyed and when your tools are destroyed and you have to rebuild and everyone is forging ahead and you're sort of staring at this pile of rubble, it takes a while to catch up. And then how it was to be on the other side and to empathize with other people who were new to the country, going through a lot of the same motions that I was. So, what's in it for you? What do you have to learn from this? I would urge each and every one of you, when you're doing presentations, to weave in stories. Think about what aspects, either from your own life or what analogies you could make. Anytime you can weave in stories, it makes your conversation, your presentations, your sales pitches, all of those things so much more engaging. So just get in the habit of telling more stories and at the same time asking questions, right? So I love coming up with questions that I think other people want to answer, but at the same time a lot of my inspiration comes from Priya Parker, Esther Perel. She has this incredible this box of cards and it's called Where Should We Begin. So she has one for life and then one for work. So you can even pick up the work one if you're interested in just doing this in a workplace setting. And I've actually bought that set for so many of my mentors and my friends and family. Also, as a Toastmasters nerd, I can tell you table topics is a big source of inspiration. If you just look up table topics questions online, you'll find a great list of questions. Well, that's a wrap on this in between episode of Thoughts Between Shots. If you laughed, cried, got goosebumps, learned something sneaky useful, make sure to share it with your people. And if you have a good idea for a story, a storyteller, or a question, hit me up in the DMs. Until next time, keep being curious and keep telling good stories. Bye.